Did you?
Y'all need to say something. Baba need to say something. Ori need to say something. King Five say something. Hey, all of the money Five say something.
With exposing students to multidisciplinary and in some instances interdisciplinary perspectives on a community of people who meant a lot to the city where they were buried, but then also who meant a lot to their families and to our own ideas of who we were as a people of African descent. So the students have the opportunity when they visit the burial ground and the visiting center especially to take a look at the artifacts that were actually found on the property in the cemetery, and then to see the film where they can see what it was like to be a part of a community that insisted that the remains of their ancestors be respected completely.
To see a West African symbol called a sankofa, and that means return to the past to prepare for the future. And that fits in real well with the National Park Service because our motto is that we are guardians of the past and stewards of the future.
One of the things I think that is very striking for our students, as Dr. Williams has talked about, is for them to become aware, just nominally aware in a very small way, of the importance of Howard University and of black scholars and black scholarship. When they come to the New York African Burial Ground, of course it's a very impressive site, they're very much impressed by the space. But when, even in casual conversation with some of the New Yorkers who now make their way to the burial ground on the times that we come, because they know we're coming, they begin to understand just how significant Howard was in getting that burial ground properly treated. Everything from respecting our ancestors to investigating their lives to the re-internment process, which involved thousands of people over several days, which began right here on the campus of Howard at the Andrew Rankin Chapel. Our students come away, if you can imagine an 18-year-old, a 19-year-old coming out of that space realizing, wow, that's where I go to school. And it's not only a sense of pride, but for some of them it's a sense of responsibility that they carry through, not only through graduation, but we like to think that it reorients them in terms of what their work as students will mean, not only to their individual families, but to our collective community. And I think that's something that we always take great satisfaction in seeing those young people become aware of what they have now become a part of as a result of coming to our university.
Once you exit the chamber, you're standing on a world map. And if you notice on that map, the arrow is pointing directly through New York City and then onto Africa. There is a spiral inscription on that world map. It's 26 remains chosen randomly. They're buried in the mounds there, but we recognize them there to remind us of their human stories. I think when people hear about 419 remains, we forget that each of these people had their own lives, right? Their own stories behind them.
Africans recognized their Africanness and celebrated it and honored it. And there's no better place, a more important, more sacred place to do that but in a burial ground.
There are a lot of moments that I think are incredibly important. But the one that without fail moves me, no matter how many times we do it, and that I'm absolutely clear moves the students without fail, is the moment of libation. The silence, the respect, the reverence, the clarity, all of it's there. And even as the students can't necessarily associate completely and understand completely all of the references, we can hear them talking about it and trying to figure out exactly what it is and what the reference was. And they begin to feel a little bit differently and take ownership of their humanity.
Our next libation to the first human being that occupied this planet. The first human beings who walked out of the rifts of East Africa, Old Bay Gorge, whether through DNA, the woman they call mitochondrial Eve, who has been traced through the DNA to understand that all humans on the planet are African in origin, or whether we call her Dinkanesh, the bones, like these bones that came out of the ground, the woman that British anthropologists called Lucy, but that the Amharic people, the people of East Africa, called Dinkanesh, the wonderful one, the mothers and fathers of all of human beings. Ashe? Ashe. Before our next libation, to those Africans who became the children of those first human beings, those who walked out over the planet Earth, those who populated Asia, those who populated Europe, those who walked across the Bering Strait and came across the other land bridges to populate Central America, North America, the Caribbean, those who found their way through the archipelago of Southeastern Hemisphere to populate Australia. We pour to the Africans who populated the entire world, Ashe. Ashe. We pour to their children, our ancestors who stayed on the continent of Africa, who spread out to East Africa, who spread out to West Africa, who came up into the Nile Valley and came into North Africa, who went south through the Kalahari and came into Southern Africa. We pour to those ancestors who call themselves many names, whose many names we know now through the names of their languages. We pour to those in Southern Africa, the Nguni language speakers, the Sotho and the Swana and the Ndebele and the Zulu and the Xhosa. We pour to those in East Africa, the Shilluk and the Nur and the Dinka, and those in the Nubian Valley who come up the Nile Valley, those who now occupy what we call Aswan and Luxor. We pour to those in West Africa, those around the Senegambia region, the great Wolof people, the people of Central Africa, the people that we know now as the Ovimbundu people, and the people that we know now as the Imboche people, the people of Central Africa, the Kikongo and the Bakongo, the people in the Baida Benin and the Baida Biafra that we know as Yoruba and Efik, and the people we know as Hausas and Igbos and Abibio, the people who occupy the Bight and the Bend of the tree-speaking languages, the Akan people, the people of the Ashantis and the Fantis and the Ga. We pour to all those Africans who occupied the entire continent of Africa. Ashe? Ashe. We pour to their children, our ancestors, those who found themselves walked and marched across the Horn of Africa, those who found themselves sold in places like Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, those who found themselves sold in places like Gorée in Senegambia in the Senegal region on Gorée Island, those who found themselves captive and hostage and stuffed onto boats in places like Elmina, the mine, in places like Cape Coast, in places like the shore of Angola. We pour to our ancestors, the mothers and fathers of the ancestors that are now buried before us. Ashe? Ashe. We pour to their children, our ancestors, who being stuffed on these boats, lost their lives fighting, stuffed often in their last moment on the planet, on the continent of their birth, their feet bare like mine, those who scooped the dirt on the ground and often either rubbed it on themselves or put it in their mouths and said we must hold tight to the earth that we are from. Those who took their memories and passed them on mouth to ear, stuffed into boats, emptied living into the Western Hemisphere, those whose children perished on the road, those whose elders perished on the boats, those who jumped overboard or who were thrown overboard, those who didn't make it physically but whose spirits continue to animate and who continue to move through the universe. We pour to those who made it live, those who were cast adrift in places like Port-au-Prince in Haiti, those who were cast adrift in places like Port-au-Spain, Trinidad, those who were cast adrift in Salvador Bahia, those who found themselves in Pernambuco, those who found themselves in Havana, Cuba, those who found themselves in Puerto Rico, those who found themselves in Charleston, South Carolina, New Orleans, Louisiana, Boston, Massachusetts, those who found themselves in Philadelphia and Norfolk, Virginia, Mobile, Alabama, those who found themselves thrown living into the port of New Amsterdam, the place the Dutch had taken from the Aboriginal people of this island named Manhattan. who took from them the only name they had ever called the place Manhattan, and then populated it with the bodies of our ancestors. We poor those ancestors who took their languages and blended them and mingled them, who then had the languages of Dutch and Spanish and Portuguese and English and French pressed upon their tongues, who called to their gods in the many names that they knew them by, but who now called to them in new names, who called to them in Spanish, Madre de Dios, who called them in French, Mon Dieu, who called to them in English, oh my God, and prayed that they would be able to endure the hardships and continue the suffering and transcend the suffering one day with victory and the last prayer on their lips. And some of them died by being burned alive, and some of them died for trying to run away, and some of them died under labor as teenagers carrying things much too heavy for a child to carry, whose last prayer on their lips was that a generation would come. They will remember them, remember their sacrifice, and make that sacrifice mean something. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to their children, our ancestors, who endured centuries in this hemisphere, who fought their way out of enslavement. We pour to their children, our ancestors, who fought their way out in Brazil, led by the great Quilombo, the Quilombos of Brazil, Ganga Zumba and Zumbi, the leader that led his people to independence, maroon communities. We pour to their children, our ancestors like Nanny, Maroon Queen of the Jamaicans. We pour to their children, our ancestors like Toussaint Louverture, Henri Christophe, Jean Dessalines, who fought the Haitian Revolution, the avengers of the New World. We pour to their children, our ancestors, the Maroons of Suriname, the Maroons of Guyana. We pour to their children, our ancestors, who were in South Carolina at Stono in 1739, who were in Porte Coupé in Louisiana, who led the Great Rebellion led by Nat Turner in Virginia and Gabriel Prosser and Denmark Vesey. We pour to their children, our ancestors, who could not escape with their physical bodies, but who toiled in the kitchens, who labored in the fields, who broke tools, who poisoned their masters, who silently prayed after being raped and pillaged, that they would survive that moment of violence and continue to fight on in the kitchens of Boston and Philadelphia, in the kitchens of Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to their children, our ancestors who fought their way out in this country, the Great Civil War. The ancestors who fought their way out, who then fought for citizenship. We pour to the children of these ancestors before us, their children in this city who led the fight in New York. We pour to those children who made sure that they would sacrifice so that the generations after them would not have to do what they did. Ashe.
Ashe.
We pour to their children, our ancestors, who then received that directive and made the Great Migration. Those are your ancestors, your direct ancestors. We pour to those ancestors who left the Caribbean, who left Africa, who left Latin America, many of them coming here to New York, many of them coming to DC, many of them coming to the cities that you're from, who left the southern part of the United States, who left Louisiana and went to California, who left Mississippi and went to Chicago, who left Alabama and Tennessee and went to Detroit and Cleveland and Buffalo, New York. We pour, in other words, to those ancestors that you know. We pour to your ancestors. These are your bloodline ancestors, your great-great-great-grandparents, your great-great-grandparents, your great-grandparents, some of them your grandparents, the people that you heard of in your family reunions, those are the old people in your family talk about. And as I pour this libation, if you feel like saying some of their names, go right ahead. Let their names bounce off that wall. I'm gonna say some of my ancestors. I hope some of y'all will say some of yours. Haywood Carr, Basil Carr,
Mark
Della
Mack,
Carr, Thomas Hayes Booth, Gussie Hayes,
Martin Williams,
Ella Williams,
Benny
Albert
Walker,
Williams.
Mary Simon Walker.
We all remember the ancestors in this moment. We pour 3 more times. We pour a libation to the ancestors who, when this building began to be erected, as they dug the foundation, laid down in front of bulldozers, stopped the digging, went to the meetings, went to Capitol Hill in Washington, went to the hearings here, the ancestors who sat before Congressman Gus Savage, the ancestors like John Henrik Clark, the great historian, who said that if you start your history with slavery, everything since then looks like progress. The great ancestors like those who were in the First World Alliance, who came from Harlem, those from the People's Republic of Brooklyn who came over the bridge and said, you will no longer disrespect our ancestors. We pour to those who are no longer with us, like Queen Mother Melba Franklin, who would always say one simple word in these moments: teach. These are the ancestors that protected this space until others could come and protect it. Ashe?
Ashe.
We pour the second of the three final pourings to those who are still here. We pour to Ranger Collecting. We pour to all the rangers that guard this place. Because theirs is a sacred task. Theirs is a sacred obligation. We pour to these rangers who are here every day, who have welcomed us here for years, who have met our buses, who have brought us across, who are about to take us through and help us understand why this place is as important as it is. We pray for their health. We pray for your strength. We pray for your continued vitality. We pray and we pour to the folks who have accompanied us from Howard, all of the administrators, the staff, and faculty who continue to come to this place. We pour because we know that we are your family away from your family, and your family has entrusted you to us, and this sacred ritual bonds them through us to you and to each other. We pour, Ashe.
Ashe.
Finally, we pour to our children's children's children. This being the ritual that we have developed, we always have some young ones among us, and it is appropriate in this final trip to the burial ground for this fall with freshman seminar and the class of 2017 that we got the children. We pour to your children's grandchildren, because one day, 100 years from now, 200 years from now, they will stand here. This building may not be here. This country will probably not be here. But what will be here is the memory of those who were here before there was an America and who will be here after there was an America. We pour to those children of the children of the children, the beautiful ones who are not yet born. Ashe.
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 Ashe.